have to step out in a second for lunch duty, but thank
Okay.
you for letting me join.
Yeah, of course.
I'll say my
Are
comment.
we starting now or do we
later.
water?
What was it? I
No,
think we
you
started.
cannot drink water.
Okay, I'll wait.
What's with the water?
It's illegal now.
Do we not eat in
It
History
started.
Club?
No, we
No, we can
No.
eat, we
Yeah.
can eat. I just don't wanna
Never
start.
breaking
I
every
was just
rule.
messing
What
with
is that?
Julia. Famine.
Alright. So yeah, let's get started on the topic for today.
Magnus, I just want to point out, it's kind of pointless if I wear heels and you're wearing heels too.
Can't even
I'm not wearing. I'm not
Those
wearing-
have heels.
Yeah, well, most shoes have.
I'm just pointing it out.
This is just
Continue.
the-
Let's continue.
Anyway,
Actually.
What do you mean it's anything?
it's a struggle. It makes me. It
You
makes me.
feel me now, right?
Yeah, it was in 7th grade. I really started to understand teachers a lot more when I started the club. But yeah, so today's topic is ancient Greek philosophy. It was originally both ancient Greek and ancient Eastern philosophy, but looking into it was like way too much to do in one lesson. So we were just doing the ancient Greek part. Ancient Eastern philosophy is a votable topic for next week. Just have more condensable. And so let's start off with our usual beginning question. But today it is, well, what is knowledge? Basically, what is like
The act of knowing.
the act of knowing?
Mm-hmm. Why is it
It's
really
power.
That is very
No,
broad.
just power. That's right.
Knowledge is power. Okay.
You took so long to start, I finished my mac and cheese. You better, Magnus.
We've
Stir
been
fried
eating for like
bacon
the past
sandwich.
15 minutes.
No, I haven't.
All right. Well, of course, like a lot of Greek philosophy, not a lot of it, but you know, some studies with like, especially with famous philosopher Socrates was really talked a lot about knowledge, and is kind of a big surrounding of Greek philosophy as a whole. Just like knowledge and self-intelligence, kind of, at least with those specific, their specific ideas with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. But first, of course, going introduction, just going through what we're gonna move over basically with this. Of course, we're gonna go through the context of ancient Greece in that time period of when most of this philosophy was happening.
It looks like someone stuck a finger in his like Pop Tart or something.
That's,
It looks like someone messed up his dinner. He's really pissed. He's like, ugh,
I'm not sure where you get that from, but.
look at his face.
So sorry. And we're also going to go over kind of how these ancient Greek philosophy was really a huge inspiration and base for Western philosophy and all those kind of ideas. And of course, also going over this lesson, this is not very like true or in depth to everything. It's just very basic level understanding of the ideas and the thoughts of these philosophers in the time. But I would love to actually get far deeper and maybe do multiple history topics on this. But of course, moving on to basically ancient Greece, the idea. Some people may think ancient Greece was a common city or country like Greece is nowadays, which is not really what it was. It was kind of more of a collection of city-states, whereas there's, of course, Athens was its own city-state. You may have heard of Sparta here. And so also Olympia. And basically they're kind of just, I guess, city-states with their own forms of government and independence from each other, which allowed for kind of rivalries between each other, such as between Athens and Sparta. It would be very common for them to have wars against each other, but when invaded by another country such as Persia and the Peloponnesian Wars, or from Troy, they would generally kind of put their arms down against each other and unite together to thwart any of the invaders, pretty much. It was interesting, I read a historian was talking about why, they're kind of thinking about why philosophy was so more, I guess, more prominent in Greece than anywhere else in the world. Well, not anywhere else in the world, but it was more prominent in Greece and kind of the Mediterranean area. And he was thinking that it was because of this inter-city-state competition and rivalry that created this drive to learn more and to innovate better and greater and more, I guess you could say. Because one of the arguments for this was that once Alexander the Great had united all these Greek city-states from Macedonia, this level of innovation had slowed down a lot, and once Alexander the Great died and Greece was conquered by the Romans, that all the level of innovation completely died out. Not to say that the ideas of the Greek philosophy had completely died out. The Romans actually adopted most of them, but is that the innovation of them had just stopped. So that was his thought to why the Greeks were more prominent in their philosophy. But moving into the basic era of ancient Greece, is considered to have started at the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, which marked the end of the Bronze Age in Greece, and which started this ancient Greece era from roughly 1200 to 323 BC, which was the year when Alexander the Great had died, and Alexander's empire had basically broken apart. So this is considered the era of ancient Greece that we'll be talking about. So, moving on to another important aspect of ancient Greece was, of course, their religion and mythology. Of course, I'm sure everyone knows there's a lot of very rich mythology of ancient Greece. Like for tales like Tantalus or Narcissus. This is one I wasn't forgetting, but like kind of basic morals, myth of Narcissus was he tried to get basically very basic summary of the myth was that Narcissus tried to get a love potion and have someone else fall in love, and I think he accidentally drank it and saw his reflection in a pond and fell in love with himself and sat there until he starved to death,
Oh.
which is one of the roots of why like Narcissus is like that, like really being very self-centered in a way. So that's like a small bit of like Greek culture that is very prominent in Western culture now. But going over the religion of Greece, it was very polytheistic, meaning there are many gods. I've heard of like the Mount Olympus, which was the main center of all the Greek gods, such as Zeus, who is the king of all the gods, and maybe Apollo.
Imagine like being a god and there's another god who's like, I'm god of gods. And you're like, well, you're a god, but then there's like another god that's like higher on the hierarchy of gods than you. Like, can you imagine? Oh, that would just suck.
Well, that's just like having a boss.
I feel so sucky though. Like I'm one god. Why can't I just be like the other gods?
Well, it's like each god was kind of gods around like
Territory.
forgetting. I
Isn't
think
there like a messenger god?
It's like the
Hermes.
government. You got your
Yeah.
president god, you got your president, you got your god in charge of transportation or the sea, you got your one in charge of agriculture.
yeah.
And you just got one
Less
that's in charge of
democratic
hell.
though.
Yeah, it was also interesting to see when the Romans took over. They basically, they took over a lot of Greek culture and religions, and also including the Greek gods, and had rebranded them. I really forget what his original name was, but it was, I think his Roman name was Neptune.
Poseidon, wasn't it?
Poseidon.
Other way around.
And then many other gods were named to like Mars or Jupiter, Pluto, and all that. And also this included.
Is Pluto a god?
Well,
I don't
He's
think.
more of a
Well,
dwarf
I
god.
don't think Pluto was a god. I don't know though.
I didn't really look too far into like exactly the Roman gods, but that was just what I read was that where they were kind of renamed to. Those also like includes like lesser, like kind of demigods, not quite gods, but superhumans, almost like Hercules.
Top tier Disney movie, not gonna lie.
Who's the guy with the shoe?
It's Achilles.
Yeah, Achilles. There's another one.
Doesn't he have something to do with the Trojan horse? Or am I mixing two?
Yeah, he does. I've always found it interesting, like this story where like he had like his mom dipped him into I'm not exactly sure the details, but dipped him into something that gave him immunity, but held him by the Achilles.
Like you're already putting him head first. Just dip your hand in a little, and your hand will be.
Well, like her mom's fingers would cover them anyways.
Why couldn't she just dip her hands in a little bit?
Well, even if she did, it's covering. She has to hold on to the baby real, like holding on to a baby by the Achilles.
I know, but why can't she hold? This is Achilles, right? Here's his heel. Here's the water line. She went like this. Why didn't she just go 2 inches deeper?
Well, because her fingers are covering that area of the skin.
No, she dipped the entire
Did she
thing
get,
in,
like-
but her fingers were covered.
It's one heel, and then like.
It's also a baby, like, you have to hold on to it.
No, I know, but once it's in there, you grab another part of the baby's leg that's like already in there, and then pull it out. There's so much that she could have done.
Okay.
Like she failed the task. He's no
Yeah,
longer
whatever.
immune if you're not
Alright, let's
getting
just-
every part
alright.
of him immune.
Regardless of that.
Let's just move on.
That's so stupid.
I thought she could have just dipped it in again, but whatever.
Like a double dipping situation.
It's just like they're
That's
like
not
no, and then another god comes up and it's like Zeus comes up. He's like, I'm sorry, no double dipping. We don't do that here. Next.
Okay, moving on. Another part of it was, even though Zeus was the god of gods, he wasn't like the full reign or anything. Everything followed fate. Like Zeus, even if he wanted to, couldn't go against fate. It's an idea of fate that like it's just gonna happen anyways, almost. I would also like to go over the extensive mythology, Achilles, going into the Achilles part of the heel, which for those who don't know is called that because that was the only place he didn't have immunity, and then
His mother's kind of an idiot.
and so he died because he got hit in the Achilles by an arrow. So
He
even
didn't
though-
put shoes on? He
Like
could have put
sandals.
shoes on.
I don't,
He didn't
I
put
don't think
armor
I
on?
don't think a shoe is gonna stop an arrow.
Like a piece of metal, maybe.
I'm
Will a
thinking
shoe
of-
stop a bullet?
No, I know. Listen, I know that arrows do a lot. I've been to like an archery thing and they like shoot it and it goes through like a metal warehouse. I know, but like, come on.
So I hit.
Okay.
He died to an arrow in the foot.
Yeah.
Like, didn't they just chop people's legs off if they got infected? He would have been Achilles without a foot, but
Tell us about Herodotus.
Yes. Thank you, Allison. Yes, let's go to Herodotus, who is given the title of father of history. Actually given this title by the Roman poet Cicero. Also, again, no, he is not the father of actual history, just history as a discipline for historians.
it's his story.
Yeah. If I keep notes, it's hard to keep in mind. But at the time before Herodotus really produced his main work called the Histories, history was kind of taught in just a list of things that happened. And the reasoning behind it was that it was like the God's will, or the God intended for this, or fate intended for this to happen. But Herodotus but he wanted to explore exactly why and how and all the aspects of an actual event. And so his main work, which was the Histories, looked on the Peloponnesian War, where the Persians attempted to invade Greece and take it over, to which Greece was able to, even though being underdog, win. Or not win, but just defeat the Persians to not be invaded. Not that the Greeks invaded Persia and took them over, but Alexander did that later. And he was especially known for by like having this method of where he went around all over the Mediterranean and asked people for their eyewitness accounts, and was going over ideas how it was bring up the idea of an autopsy, which at least at the time it was thought of as losing my thoughts. But like it gave us the word autopsy, which means to see for oneself, or opsis, and kind of an eyewitness, and I think it's known to reason it out. And so with this, he got all these eyewitness accounts and was able to reason from that kind of what happened and condense it into the histories, which might not be 100% credible with stories that are probably not true, but
Better than nothing.
yeah. But yes. Also, again, I should say, we were going with the academics of kind of Greeks. Also Euclid, who's known as the father of geometry. And also Homer, a great poet of Greece who had authored stories such as the Odyssey and the Iliad.
Isn't the Iliad just essentially like it's a poem, but like it's just a big book essentially.
It's an epic.
It's an epic poem.
But like, isn't that kind of just a book? It's like long.
Somewhat, but it's interesting because an epic poem at the time was meant to be delivered orally rather than read. And I've heard that the storyteller had a staff, and he'd have a specific beat for every word and line, and have to kind of speak
To
in
memorize it.
the rhythm of the story that was being told.
Hey, Courtney.
I was gonna say.
Yes. So yeah. Also looking into society and culture of the Greeks. Of course, Greece, specifically Athens, was known for the founding of democracy, which is like the ruling of the people. And even though maybe the idea of Greece being the inventor of democracy, maybe people think all of Greece was democracy, but most common government type was like an oligarchy or a kingdom of, at least of the city-state, but Athens was the beginning of democracy, where they decided to have a rule by the people. And interestingly, of course, democracy includes voting, but only citizens can vote. At the time, it was free, land-owning, native-born men were citizens, which was roughly 15% of the population. Also, interestingly, they had a system of education, which instead of like teaching you how to be good in occupation, they taught you how to be an upstanding, efficient citizen in a democracy or in a society, which I thought was interesting. Similar to Wildwood, I guess, in that. So moving on to the main part of the philosophy of our ancient Greek philosophy, now with all this context of ancient Greek culture and the city-states and religion.
Is curly hair just a thing they have? Because I just really have like curly or wavy hair. Or do they just not wash their hair? Listen, I don't know. Sorry, that just occurred to me.
Maybe that's just how they sculpted.
Maybe.
Fair enough.
It could be an element of both. I don't really know specifically. But first was, I think it's maybe Thales or Thales. I'm not 100% sure, but he's generally thought of the father of Greek philosophy. More of that, he is the first documented philosopher, you could say, of ancient Greek philosophy, where he really actually thought about reality as a whole and what it actually is. And because he made an observation that everything can turn into what he called air, slime, and earth, which you might recognize as gas, liquid, and solids from science. And he thought there had to be some kind of unifying element of all of these, to which he believed everything was made of water, which we know this to not be true now, but thinking back to why he might have thought would have been pretty understandable, thinking that if someone bleeds, it's mostly liquid, you could see that as kind of water. So you can kind of see that thought process.
That table's 100% made of ice.
Yeah. But also the philosophy of Greece was focused on reason and inquiry, learning more.
So they were like Vulcans. A little bit.
A
A little bit.
I guess maybe you could say. And also on the basis of reality. So moving on to, we're going to go over three of the most famous philosophers. First, Socrates, who is considered the father of Western philosophy, and very much well known for the Socratic method, which actually is something we could probably do an entire history club off of. But it's a way of asking questions to teach someone, basically. And of course, how Socrates would do it is he would get an expert in whatever subject he wants to talk about, and he asks them for a definition of that field. And from that, he narrows it down and asks more maybe difficult and detailed questions like, what is the virtue of whatever this is? And eventually, he will it has always been found that the expert would contradict themselves in the first definition, and then he would create a new definition. And from this, you're trying to narrow down the scope to what is actually true of whatever field the expert is in or talking about.
I got a question.
Yeah.
This is a little bit off topic, but still on topic. Again, about the sculptures. Do you think they were like accurately sculpted, or they made them look different? Like, is this like actually what Socrates did?
I guess I wouldn't really notice if this is what Socrates actually. I'm sure he looked more like a person than marble, but
Well, yeah.
but
Like
it is.
Davy Jones.
It is, I guess, a representation of what we have from that time. I don't know if it's an accurate representation of who he is, because it's kind of known when when a royalty is having themselves painted, they can pay extra for the artist to make them look nicer.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I don't know if that was a thing or if this is what they actually look like, but anyways, there's also Socratic ignorance, which is basically to know the extent of your own knowledge, to kind of be knowingly ignorant, which Socrates is best known saying, I know nothing, basically. And it kind of goes about, I guess, not being able to know what you don't know. But it's interesting because there's also a very deep level of Socratic irony, because he says, I know nothing, but if you know nothing, then how can you know anything? And it's unsure if he was actually trying to be ironic or he was just really contradicting himself, because he never actually wrote anything from himself. Mostly what we know from him is the writings of Plato and some of his students. He's taught people and people studied under him. And he also, with this other irony, talking about how virtue is connected to knowledge. All virtue is the same because it branches off of knowledge, and someone who could say is not virtuous or is not good is that because they don't know a lot or they are not knowledgeable, which is interesting. And again, this irony of having to know something even though he's talking about not knowing anything.
It's like Karens. Think about them, like they think they know everything, but they don't, and then they just think like idiots.
I guess you could say. All right, moving on to our next very notable philosopher, that being Plato. Plato was a student of Socrates, to which he has also written a lot of works where he talks about Socrates. Interestingly, Plato had thought of the idea of the soul. I think it's interesting. He talks about how the soul gives you life, and it's kind of different from your physical self. And when you die, the soul is immortal and is how you kind of experience the afterlife. So, kind of came up with the idea of the soul, at least so I read. And he was also really thinking into epistemology, which is kind of a field where you try to understand exactly what knowledge is, to which he believes knowledge is justified true belief. It's best represented with the Venn diagram, at least that I saw that I thought was best understanding of. Certainly, anywhere I can put this, but basically, in one we have truth, and here we have beliefs. And in the middle here is knowledge. Because of course, I mean, we've seen countless times people who don't take in the full truth because of their beliefs. But anyways, this was just an interesting representation of it that I thought.
Yeah, I think you're right. That was a really good way to show it.
Yeah. Also looking into the forms, he really studied the forms, and also going into reality a lot, where he believed the reality we see is just a poor imitation of what the actual reality is. So we say we have like an apple that we can perceive. Take that as my apple. And so this is not perceptual, this is just perceptual reality that we can see. It was also believed by Socrates that if someone who only sees their world with their senses, such as the one who sees only with their eyes is blind, is another great quote of his. But yeah, this notion that there's another separate reality with the ideal apple. So let's say this is the ideal form of an apple. This actually seems more, but let's just say this is.
Well, that one's bigger.
Yeah.
More nutritional value.
And so this is the property of all apples in the world. All apples have this property of idealness, but not quite. And so this is a projection of that, basically, which is imperfect, and that this world of perception is constantly changing, whereas this world is not. It's constantly staying the same and seeing the ideal version of what it is. This also applies to ideas such as justice, love, or beauty. How those are all ideas captured in our perceptual world, but is an ideal version in a separate reality.
Right, you're back there.
Yeah, and he also was talking about the forms of good and the beginnings of ethics. So, Plato, student of Socrates, this is the three main things I found of his. Moving on to Aristotle.
Quick time check.
Well,
we
he
have
got a
5
different-
minutes.
He got a different rock toga.
So Aristotle was a student of Plato here. And he was actually someone who brought up logic, and more of like a logical method.
Oh my god, he's Spock.
For example, we've all done math proofs in geometry and algebra 2. He kind of brought the idea of this where, for example, you could say excuse my handwriting, all people are mortal. So you have the statement that it's generally accepted that all people are mortal. You can say all
Generally accepted.
Greeks are people.
Okay.
Therefore,
So-
all are mortal.
Yes, so all Greeks are,
I like that he had to prove that though.
well, it's just an example.
Yeah.
So yeah, all people are mortal, all Greeks are people, therefore all Greeks are mortal. He also brought the idea of potential and actuality, such as, for example, if you have like a pile of wood, you could say that has the potential to be a table. And there are, again, and also has to do with change. There are 3 different forms of change that he has denoted. First one being growth, that is quantity change, locomotion, that is the rate of change, and alteration, which is quality change. Interestingly, he also brought the notion of learning as a form of change, which you never really think of seeing learning or gaining an ability as a philosophical thought. But he would believe that it was the end result came before the potential or before the material. Like, for example, like just building a table is not the reason why you build a table. You build a table because you need to put stuff on something. So that need comes before what you actually do, and such. And then he also brought a lot of ethics, a lot of thoughts on ethics to the table. I didn't mean to say table, but I guess you get what I mean. But yes, and for a long, we saw Plato and Socrates talking about ethics, but Aristotle was thinking because Socrates and Plato were thinking of ethics as a very theoretical form, whereas Aristotle was more of like actually acting upon ethics, that being ethical is to do and act well, and to not do that means you are
Just
unethical.
like Wildwood,
Yeah,
ethical behavior.
yeah. You can, and even just looking, you can definitely see how this bridges off to modern Western thought, or just Western thought and philosophy and culture, all throughout, for the most part.
I'm still admiring their craftsmanship on these
He
Yeah.
got a different rock toga.
No, but think about it. They had to carve the rock to look like it was fabric and then make it smooth.
Yeah, it's interesting that we haven't seen any of these in these statues, but it was more common in busts or statues of people that the eyes would be made of very delicate but special stone that's meant to be very shiny or different from the rest, whereas it's meant to reflect how the eyes are very special to a person. They look very different to your skin or your mouth or your tongue.
Have they like faded over time or something?
No, they just kind of fall out or they deteriorate because of how fragile they are.
But this guy has eyes.
Yeah, but they're just marble. They'll be made of like maybe jade or something. I'm not exactly
He
sure what they
wasn't
made
special
of.
enough to get the jade eyes. I see how it is.
Alright, we got
Um,
2 minutes.
Hey!
yeah.
Yeah, let's vote.
Yeah.
I vote on the river thing.
River thing? Oh yeah. Okay, so first topic, ancient Eastern philosophy, river crossings.
Yeah.
And I also added continue on ancient Greek philosophy because there's just so much to cover.
Okay.
I'd be happy to continue on and like look at more schools of thought and all that.
Can we have 2 votes because there's 4 of us?
Sure. Everyone gets 2 votes. You can only vote once per topic though, let's say.
Okay.
Alright, raise your hands for ancient Eastern philosophy.
You can't vote twice? Okay, no, take that.
No, you can
Everyone
vote
gets one
twice.
vote.
It's
Everyone
not-
gets one vote.
No, you can vote twice, you just can't vote for the same topic twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then what's the point?
So
Point
we,
is, the other
so we
thing
can
is
narrow
the
it
votes.
down.
We're not gonna win anything.
Yes, we are. Do
Well,
it.
we'll do another round.
Vote.
Okay.
Let's go.
Ancient Eastern philosophy. Raise your hand.
Count
Noises.
noises.
1. Alright. River crossings. 1, 2.
Wait, one for ancient Eastern philosophy.
Okay. Prisoners and prison system. That's 1. War, ancient Greek philosophy. That's 1.
That's
3,
me,
2.
that's me also.
Oh, that's 3.
There we go.
Who wants to see one of these topics again? River crossings or
River
ancient?
crossings.
Ancient philosophy.
River crossings.
Ancient philosophy.
River crossings.
River crossings!
Okay, fine. I'll put them both in there.
Yeah!
Okay, so this will be the,
Alright.
like, the 2
So
topics.
more Greek philosophy next week.
All right.
Okay,
Thank
so
you, man.
prisons and prison systems. But can you throw that in, like, in a couple weeks or something?
Alright, I'll throw it in later.
Okay.
See you, man.